So thanks for the kind introduction. I'm going to continue in English since I'm still a little bit sloppy on the Slovene side. I'm learning, but I guess it's still a bit too tough for the whole presentation. Let me start the presentation with a short story. Just recently, at the beginning of the year, I stumbled onto a communication between Sir Isaac Newton and Royal Astronomer John Flamsteed, where apparently Isaac Newton was trying for half a year to get the observations that John Flamsteed had made, and this culminated in a letter where Newton told Flamsteed that all his calculations, all his science would be useless to him unless provided with the observations that Flamsteed had made. So essentially asking Flamsteed to openly publish his research data. So we'll see this topic that we're talking about to a large degree today. It's something that's already some 330 years and it still is relevant. And also in a similar matter, I would say, this is how I got into opening up my research data and being interested in open research data in general. So these are some measurements that we took in like 2010. So this was still during my PhD works. And the important thing here to take with is not the spectra themselves, it's just to see, okay, we needed to do some kind of analysis for chemical composition, and the data, due to the resolution of the machines that we had available, required reference data so that we could conduct the analysis in a way that we could get to meaningful results. And this kind of reference data I eventually got, and we were able to make a nice paper out of this, and it also secured my follow-up funding with the next project. So this is nice, it all worked out. But we had quite some troubles to get from the measurements to the actual analysis and the results that were publishable. So in order to get suitable reference data of these standard materials, things that had been investigated with similar methods for many decades already. And so I went through databases, went through abstracts of a couple of thousand articles, reviewed in detail some 350, a little over 350 research papers, and found that not a single one of them had a complete set of values that I would have required as the reference, which was a little bit of frustration, of course, after going through these papers and spending approximately a month of work just working with the literature. I found many wrong citations, many inconsistencies, and started to just prioritize those papers that seemed most reliable, combined those findings that they published in a sort of jigsaw approach, putting together individual bits and pieces to have something as a database then to to do my analysis upon. Now, as you can see, it did work out, and also the reviewers with the article mentioned this quite fondly, how we went through all the literature. However, it's maybe a little bit of a frustration to see how science or how this community is currently operating, that over 350 publications out of 3 decades did not state the whole thing that they did. So reproducibility is really impaired like that, when you cannot reproduce the results because they're not stated in total. And also with really a lot of wrongly cited values, with inconsistencies, and with quite a couple inappropriately conducted analysis inside the paper. So this is also something where you might wonder about code of conduct for research integrity and about these ethical standards in science. But without getting in depth into this, with this frustration and the negative experience that I had there, I decided I don't want other people to feel the same about my papers. Try to be as complete as I could possibly get. And when we started with this proposal for the Marie Curie that I'm currently working on, of course, I decided I want to do open data. It was still in the time when this was not the default, but I immediately did opt in and started by this opportunity then to get also deeper into procedures of open research data, and was looking for guidelines, looking for references, how to do this, how to actually implement it. And it turns out, of course, we're not the first ones thinking about these matters, and there's quite a lot of information. Particularly good information is listed on the slide. So there's a lot of things that already the Horizon 2020 manual tells you. There's a lot of different websites and associations that do help you with these kind of things. And in a very practical matter, the implementation works really well if you follow the data management planning, which is required anyhow if you do Horizon 2020 project and include open research data. And for this, there's a really nice and helpful tool, this DMP online tool, that just guides you through the whole process. They have a lot of different questions. They have a lot of different explanations. What's going to be put in here, what they want you to think about with these individual points. And so they really guide you through the whole thing to be able to put up your project and to be able to make your research data open in the most meaningful way. Now, how do we do this? Currently, it's like so that when we take measurements, when we collect data, the first thing that we do is, of course, we store it. So we store and archive all data, including the excerpts from the laboratory journal. And this is stored on a so-called storage area network. So it's a shared network drive, it's a shared disk. Essentially, on the computer, it's the same as if I would store them on my local disk. It's appearing in such a similar way, but with the added benefit, everybody else out of the work group has access to it. It's on a safe system, so it's a RAID system of disks that make sure even if one disk goes corrupt, still the data is not lost. It's a system that's back up twice a day, so even if some virus comes in or whatever, still the data is safe there, is easily accessible and can be restored. The next thing then is to make the data open, and there we were thinking, what's actually the point that people might take out of our data? We're not working in such a field like with geology, like with astronomy, where many other people might use exactly what you have done and combine this in many different ways. And there's also, for the field that we are working in, not really the standardized procedures and the standardized language for the individual experiments. So how would people actually search and find our data, and how would people make use of our data? Well, our approach is to say, the first thing how people would find our data is through our other communications, through our other publications, meaning all journal articles, meaning all conference proceedings, and everything where we put something out, we make sure that we provide all the data that's behind there. And our easy solution to do this is using Zenodo. I'm going to say a few words more about this on one of the next slides. But our essential point behind it is the data itself, and the sort of algorithm-based search and a sort of big data search would be hardly possible to really find and interpret. And so this is also one downside that still is not solved, and specifically in the whole field is not solved because this kind of standard language is not there. And then in order to make this really recognizable and findable, what we do is the stored data on Zenodo, we link this to the publication, and other way around, include the DOI, the permanent identifier, out of the Zenodo dataset. We link this in the publication, state this there, so people can find their ways around. Essentially, relatively easy. We anyhow save our data, just put the whole thing onto the repository, and state the DOI out of the repository in the publication. So not much additional work then effectively to make this work out. For the repository, we heard some words about this already in the morning during some of the presentations. Now, again, there's a lot of different repositories available. There's also material how to select, specifically the whole V3 data search engine, the whole database of suitable repositories that make sure your data will be stored in a good way, that your data will be stored in a fair way. And also with the OpenAIRE, they really give you a guideline how to go through, give a lot of different criteria. Now, our criteria differed a little bit from what they put up. First of all, of course, one major criteria for us to select our repository is functionality. So it needed to be something where the data is stored in the suitable way, where it's stored for the suitable amount of time, where it's linked with the DOI and findable, and yeah, all these things that are required by FAIR data. It should be suiting to our topics, so there's no sense in publishing our data on a repository that's for astronomy or for geology. So something that's topically specific to our topics was quite limited. I didn't find any really specific repository for these kind of things, let alone some that work with individual journals, but nothing more in general. Then, of course, it should be something that's most easy to use because, well, I cannot spend too large a part of my time just to put the data on the repository. It should be something that comes in handy and not take too much time to do. And, of course, pricing is also something that's important for us because we cannot pay like 1,000 or 2,000 euros for each individual data set. That's just not in our budget. So it needed to be something that's also cost efficient. Which left us essentially with two choices, trying to get all the things on the repository of the University of Ljubljana or using the ZNODO repository at CERN. And since the second one is so easy to use, so intuitive, and links already by itself to a lot of different other resources, like if you're using GitHub, if you're using any of these other kind of web-based resource, you're having a good chance that this is already connected and very, very simple to use. So we decided to go for ZNODO as a multi-purpose, multi-topical repository. Coming back then to other points of the data management plan. So in general, data management plan, there's no open included in the term, right? It's not open research data plan. It's not open data plan. It's a general management plan for the data. So thinking about open data is one part of it, but that's not all. And it's also what I think became obvious beforehand already when I was talking about how we store internally our data, so that even internally, not to the general public, but within our working group, the data would still stay findable, accessible, and reusable by the colleagues. Of course, the data management plan, in order to make this in a meaningful way, they ask you first to fill in a few details about the summary of the project, about the purpose that the data is collected for, and then just make you think about what kind of data are you actually collecting there. What do you do with it then? How do you actually manage this in a meaningful way? They go through all these criteria of FAIR data, and they ask about additional important points. So this is what kind of resources do you need for this? If you know approximately what kind of types and formats of data you're using and approximately how much this might be at the end of the project, then you can estimate, okay, is this rather in the order of maybe some megabytes, which is not much to deal with, or are we in the order of maybe hundreds of terabytes, which would cost some money, of course, to store this kind of data in a good way, which for us is relatively simple because most of our data is relatively small. So rather individual data sets in the order of kilobytes, not more than that. So resources are not so much of a problem for us, but it's important to think about it. Is this a problem? Is this something that I need to concern myself with? Also responsibilities. Who's responsible to actually make sure everything is worked out? Otherwise, if no one is responsible, well, we all know how these things then go. Security and ethics, I think we don't need to go into detail there. Most important things were mentioned beforehand. And so in this manner, the data management plan really helps you just overthink your own procedures and just help you make your own work, structure your own work in such a way that it's easy to do, that it's most efficient, and you're not spending much time on something that could be done easier and simpler in another manner, and to make sure that you get the most out of this. And then including, wherever possible, open data, of course. And so this is also my general impression about this whole story with open data. The implementation of that is manageable. So many people in my surroundings are afraid to start over with these kind of things because they say, I have so many things on my desk already. Why would I need to concern myself now, in addition to this, with open data? Well, it's nothing that you really do much in addition, because you're anyhow collecting, you're anyhow processing the data, so then just storing them in a suitable repository isn't much extra work. It's really manageable, and it brings you immediate benefits, where we find many publications showing that actually those papers in all different fields that put the data behind it and that open up the data are more often decided, are more often reused, and really it directly brings you the benefits as the one who does the research and publishes it. The only thing is, keep it simple so that it stays manageable. So set up the procedures in the beginning, make sure what you want to do and how you do this in an effective way, collect all the data and the metadata together, and have your routines in place for this publication and all these kind of things. So to put this into these 3 suggestions, data management plan, open research data, these are things that are really absolutely worthwhile. Specifically, even if you're saying my data is, for some reason, for whatever reason this might be, is not suited to be published openly, but still it's worthwhile to think about your procedures, how you collect and save and store your data. So in any case, these planning procedures and wherever possible also opening up the data, it's both absolutely worthwhile. And as you saw on the slides before, these platforms, the services, and lots of different support, this is readily available. So you're not lost in the woods. There's many people who will be eager to help you get your things done. And anyhow, in order to have this really implemented in all different fields and on the large scale, of course, then we will need more standardized procedures, specifically in those fields where you're talking not big data, but small data, because in many of these, it's not really well possible to correlate different kinds of data that are published. And therefore also then mandatory training is strongly suggested to really get there and have people know about what is this about. So with this, I would like to finish my talk, and I'd be very happy if there's questions, comments, and a lively discussion.
Thank you very much for a very interesting and I think useful presentation. Any questions? We have now a researcher who actually does manage the data, so you can learn from the first hand how to do it.
So the procedures that you showed, are they limited at the faculty level, or did you discuss, or are they limited on a department level, or did you discuss maybe to use that at the university level? So was there any discussion that way?
Mm-hmm. So I understand if you're asking about limitations, this is how far is this implemented, right? Yeah. Okay, so what I shown you, this is specifically for my project, which is usually the case. So these data management plans, they're not implemented on a whole university level. They're specific to each individual projects because these different kinds of data require so different procedures of handling them that it's not useful to have like one general thing, maybe one general set of guidelines, but not one general plan. We were discussing on a lot of different levels. So we were discussing, first of all, in the working group, we were discussing on the department level, and also with different people across the university. But yeah, like I said, implementation is relatively limited.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe just sub-question. Yes. But for example, infrastructure, storage, network connections can be used general one, you know, the faculty, do you use that as a service, or did you, how to say, buy this equipment from the project funds?
Yeah, so this is unfortunately something that's handled on the faculty level. Unfortunately, because so there's different kinds of support that you can get in different kinds of in different faculties at the university here. Our faculty has this network area storage, where I firstly store all the data that I create. This is something that the faculty buys as a service externally, which is, in my opinion, also the most useful way to do this, because there's so many providers who do this in a really good way. There's no need to concern yourself with that. But this is not available at all faculties. I'm aware of that. In the case that your faculty doesn't have it, there are solutions, but then you would need to see which of them are available and how costly could this become in terms of how large your data is. The larger the data, the more costly this will become. For our project, because this is available and those external services also include enough size for all the data that we have, no problems and no costs included for us. So we were lucky in that term. For other projects, it might be much more costly.
Thank you.
No, I just wanted to ask, is there possible to put the data in two repositories?
Oh.
Let's say a domestic where you are employed like university and also to ZNANOST. Is this forbidden something?
That's a very good question, and in fact, it's not forbidden. I skipped a little bit about the details of the licensing of the data. We heard a bit about that already in the morning. So you can, if you publish your data, you will always tell what kind of license do you put on this. So is it something that everyone can take a look at and can use in this way? Do you want to limit the reuse to non-commercial applications and so forth? Or do you want to even restrict the access just for some selected groups? And so in the way most of the repositories operate, you can store the data at different repositories, or what's probably even the better solution, if you have like one repository where you store most of your data, but in some cases store data on other repositories, say because the journal you're using has its own repository, so that data to this particular publication is stored on another one. You can link to the second repository through one data set in your most commonly used one. So I know that some groups are doing this already, that if they store their data for some particular reason, in some cases on other repositories, they create just a metadata index on their central repository and link these things together. So yeah, that's possible.
One question. So how do you choose the proper repository? You mentioned briefly you looked at different repositories. I think there are a lot of repositories now turning up. I was on a conference in Porto in September, Open Science Days, and there were a lot of representations from different companies that are building these different tools, including repositories. Is there any central site where you can see even any review sites for the repositories? Could you maybe comment on that?
Yeah. Yeah, so there are review sites. I think the largest and most common one is this RE3 data. I put the link early in the presentation, so just if you later on look into this, you directly have the link to click on. And at least this one has a really nice tool to search for repositories, so you can limit the kind of topics that you're working in. You can limit maybe geographical regions. You say, I'm working in Europe, so maybe I'd rather use one that's located in Europe rather than in America maybe. So there's different ways to select your repository where you want to go. By the time that I was looking, so during the start of the project, I really didn't find any field-specific ones. I found a few of them that are related somehow to these kind of natural science technical fields that I'm working in. But those only ones that were more field-specific for my areas were so expensive that I just couldn't do this with the budget that I have. So that's the reason I then went to ZNANOST. But yeah, there are really good resources telling you which kind of repositories are there, which registered ones, proven ones that are really working well. And so you can quite easily there select out of this vast amount of repositories available.